Hello, everyone. My name is Professor Greg Harding, and I'm your instructor for this creative writing course. In this introductory lecture, I'm just going to talk through some of the nuts and bolts of the class, a couple of key points on the syllabus, a little bit about the Blackboard platform and about how the course is structured and organized. And I'll talk a little bit about the creative writing that we're going to be doing in this class. I'll try to keep it brief. This is an intro and a warm-up just to get you started and oriented, and then we'll move on from there. While I'm talking here, I'm not going to introduce any other visuals, so what I'd encourage you to do is pause this video when you need to and open up the documents that I'm talking about as we go along. We're going to begin with the syllabus. All right, which if you are looking at this video, you've already seen Blackboard a little bit. It's listed in the toolbar on the left. Just click on it, open the file, and you might want to read along as we go. Similarly, other documents that I'll be referring to in this conversation, you might want to have open while we're talking, so pause and open up those documents so you can read along. It might be easier for you to absorb it that way. Anyway, so beginning with the syllabus, you can see this is English 281 Creative Writing, CRN number 1373. This is a fully online course. It is asynchronous, which means that there is no class meeting time where we all get together or where you have to be present with me and the rest of the group. You can basically do things on your own time. Now, that said, I have to make sure you understand that this class does have deadlines. Those deadlines are not flexible, especially because the course is run primarily as a workshop in which you will be using your own texts as the primary texts for the course, working with each other's writing, giving and receiving feedback. If you do not submit your work in a timely fashion, other people can't respond to it in a timely fashion. So it's important that you meet those deadlines, and I'll talk more about what they are specifically in a little bit. Anyway, the syllabus is your standard syllabus. It's got my office information, typical content, prerequisites, required texts. There is no textbook for this course. I'm providing you with all the materials that you need in the Blackboard modules, reading and video materials, etc. What I want to point out to you on this syllabus, though, is class policies. There are just a few. All right. Attendance will be measured as a function of your involvement. Okay. We have tools that allow us to see how often you log in and what you do while you're on the site. And those will help me to assess your attendance. But mostly I'm just going to be relying on your submitting your work on time and completing it in a timely fashion. So if you're doing your work, you're posting it when you should, all right, you're responding to people when you should, then your attendance should not be a problem. Communication primarily will happen in a few different ways, but outside of the course work itself, if there's any individual issues, you should use my my email address, jharding@nvcc.comnet.edu. All right. In terms of deadlines, and this is important, your written work all needs to be posted on time. All right. You can do it as early as you want. You can do it any time of day. You can do it from any location. But your deadlines are essentially Monday and Thursday midnight. And so your flexibility to do your work comes in advance of those deadlines. All right. If you don't turn your work in on time, what my standard policy is simply that I can't promise you that I'm going to be able to provide feedback for you. I'm on a schedule as well as you are. We're all busy people, and so when you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing when you're supposed to be doing it, I can't promise you that I can adjust my schedule to be able to accommodate you. I'm not saying I won't, but I'm saying I can't promise that I will. And that's the biggest problem. So if you're turning in a poem and you're expecting my feedback and you would like my feedback, then you'd better post it on time. Anyway, the other important thing about the syllabus is the course schedule. And what we have on the course schedule on page 4 is really a kind of framework for what we're going to be doing. You can see that we have a general overview of what's going to happen on any given day and what's due on any given day. But probably more importantly, and these daily listings, you can see intro, senses, metaphor, the words all correspond to modules in the Blackboard platform, in our shell, all right? One module for each week of the semester, and inside those modules, as you'll see momentarily, are all of the readings, the videos, the lectures, the assignments, the instructions that you need to complete your work. But I'd like to point you to the structure of the weekly assignments. First of all, the course is basically broken into two halves. The first half we're going to be focusing on poetry, and I'll explain why in a little bit. The second half we're going to be focused on prose writing, whether that be chapters or short stories or the like. All right, and for each different section, all right, there's a pattern of the work that you're going to be submitting. So you can see where it begins the poetry section. It says poetry. Each week, assignments will be due as follows, guidelines in the corresponding modules for each. On Monday, you will have one open poem due and one written exercise due based on the reading. So every Monday, expect that you're going to have to turn in an open poem, which I will define simply as a poem with no restrictions. It can be on any subject, it can take any form, it can be any length within reason, all right? I mean, if you just crank out 2 lines at 5 minutes before midnight on Monday, I'd hardly say you were writing a poem. You're going to get out of this what you put into it. At the same time, it's hard to put restrictions on creative work. So be reasonable about that. Anyway, so an open poem, any form, any subject, is due every Monday, and a written exercise, which I will provide for you in the module, based on whatever the subject of that week is. The first week, we're going to be focusing really simply on what poetry is, how it works, some of the basic tools and objectives, and a little bit about criticism of poetry. How do we read it? How do we critique it? So your first exercise assignment is going to be to critique a poem, 2 poems actually, that I provided for you to read. Now, on Thursdays, you're going to have an exercise poem due, which means you're going to have to write a poem that attends to the exercise or the subject matter that we're focusing on. So in the first week, you're going to skip that one, all right? And this will be all covered in an announcement later. But in the second week, for example, we're going to be focusing in Module 2 on senses and images, all right? So you're going to write a poem that focuses on creating images essentially based on a childhood memory. So your open poems are wide open, can be anything you want, but your exercise poems are going to be focused based on what you're learning that week and sometimes specific subjects that I'm going to ask you to work within. All right, so that's more like practice at the skill that you're focusing on that week than it is just freedom to create. All right. In addition, on Thursday, you're also going to have peer critiques due. In the first week, I'm going to ask you to submit an open poem, and I'm going to ask you to write basically an open critique. No guidelines, no restrictions. Talk about how you feel about that poem, positive, negative, what works, what doesn't work. All right. The second week, you'll have a more guided assignment for your peer critiques. All right. At some point during the semester, once things settle down, I will probably put you into groups and have you working with 2 or 3 other people every week. You'll be familiar with each other's work. You'll be more comfortable talking to one another honestly about each other's work and trying to help one another. This is usually a beneficial thing in a class like this, but it's very difficult to do when the roster isn't kind of settled yet. The first couple of weeks, people often come and go, and that can just make a mess out of peer collaborative efforts. So we'll hold off on that for a little bit. But that's the basic gist of the poetry sequence. The prose writing sequence of the course after spring break changes a little bit, but there'll be similarities in the patterns. It'll still be Monday and Thursday assignments due. The assignments are a little bit longer, but there's a little bit fewer. So we'll get to that when we get to that. Anyway, I want to move on to talking a little bit about the course itself in Blackboard. So if you want to pause me now and move into the Blackboard course, we'll just talk a little bit about the tools and how you're going to use them and where things are, just to familiarize yourself. I'm sure that probably at this point most of you have worked in Blackboard since we've been mostly remote for more than a year now, but just to be safe, okay? So when you open up your Blackboard page, your first thing you see is the main page is announcements, and that's where I'll be talking to the entire class about any given details or changes that might happen. I usually also send my announcements out in email, so make sure you are regularly checking your college email address. Ask me if you have questions about that. And if you're not sure about college email, you can go to the ComNet main page for help with that. All right, but if you're not checking your email, then you're not getting those automatic announcements from me and actually from the college as the official mode of communication. Anyway, so announcements will be the entry page when you get there. So whatever I have new to say to you all, it'll be front and center. But I want you to look at the left-hand toolbar. All right, and in the left-hand toolbar, you'll notice, first of all, announcements is the first thing you see, then email. Through that email link, you can access, you can send emails, you can't receive them. All right. You'll also notice that the next link is called Harding Virtual Office. All right. That is a place where you can meet with me virtually for a video or audio conference if you'd like. All right. We can set them up through email or however is necessary, messages if you want. I have established office hours. I will be in my office. You can look at the syllabus for those hours. All right. And I will be in my virtual office during those virtual office hours. But if they don't suit you, you let me know and we'll make sure that we can meet at a time that is going to work. Below those communication tools, then we have the course calendar. If you click on the course calendar, it's probably the easiest way to identify the deadlines for all your assignments. You can simply see a readout of the entire month. You'll see that the assignments are all due on Monday and Thursday, and if you click on those links on those days, you'll see what's due on that day. All right, now it's difficult to organize yourself by looking through the course calendar, but it's a good way to check quickly for what's due when, just to make sure that you don't miss anything. Then you can see the syllabus link, which you should have already accessed and read through. That's just an attachment of our syllabus. You can print it if you'd like. And anyway, moving on. All right, I don't want to make this a half-hour video here. So course content is probably the most important link, because that's the one that has all of the stuff of the course, all right? If you click on course content, what you'll notice is that there's a series of modules identified by week and by topic, okay? Introduction module, begin here. This module contains an intro video, an intro guide document that provides an overview of the course, which actually you're watching this video right now. You might also open the introductory guide document, which is basically a written form of what I'm saying to you right now. So if you're having trouble hearing or interacting with this video for whatever reason, you can go there and just read what I'm talking about. In that module, you'll see that we've got not only the videos, but also a Q&A. There's a course Q&A, and there's also a Q&A in each module where this is a new thing I'm going to try. If you have questions about the lecture, questions about the readings or the assignments, anything you want to post related to the module that you're working within, you can post those questions in this Q&A discussion. All right, and I or any of you can answer those questions. You don't even have to rely on waiting for me to get to it to answer it. If you go in there and you see someone else has asked a question and you know the answer to the question, go ahead and answer it. Help us out, because a lot of us working together will be more timely, I'm sure, than just all of you relying on me. I've got about 120 students, and it takes me time to get through all of their questions. Anyway, you'll also see there are some visual prompts, poem inspirations, which are just written subjects, topics, questions, etc. All right, and some readings that'll help you with brainstorming ideas, things you might want to write about. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my favorite poems in a couple of minutes, so I'll hold off on that. Tell you why and how I love to write poetry. And then you'll notice there's a lecture notes on bad poems, all right, and on critiquing poems, and that's going to be your first real content for the course, all right, and a discussion related to that critiquing lecture, which is going to be your first homework exercise assignment. You'll also notice there's another discussion. It says Open Poem Week 1, for which you are required to write and submit a poem, and then also comment on someone else's poem. And again, this one is kind of wide open. It will not be graded. This is just a warm-up for us here in Week 1, all right? So don't be too hard on yourself. Don't be too worried about it. Write what you feel. Write it how you like to write it, and we'll see what happens as we get started in the conversation, okay? The other modules will be similarly structured with videos, readings, assignments, discussions, which really are the place where you submit all of your work and where you share your work with others. There are a couple of other tools that you might want to be familiar with. There's a discussions link, which is sort of a shortcut around the course content modules. If you want to go straight to a discussion, either to read or to publish, you can go straight to the discussions. They're identical and linked to the ones you see in your modules. I'd encourage you to work in the modules because it's an easier way to keep things organized in terms of the order of the stuff you're doing. But the discussions is another shortcut. Then you'll also see that you've got some resources to help you if you're having trouble with Blackboard, with academics, with library work, which probably doesn't apply so much to our class, and with tech support. These are really useful resources. You've also got help in the Blackboard main page and also got help in your MyComNet if you have any problems related to technology in any way. You also see that there's an item called My Grades at the bottom where you'll be able to keep track of your grades as they progress. As I mark them up, they'll be going into our grade book, and you'll be able to see what your scores are in any given assignment. You can refer to the syllabus for the grade weights. Most of the assignments I'm simply going to be giving a point value from 0 to 10, and other than your portfolio, and then weighting them afterwards. So if you have any questions about where you stand on your grades and you can't figure it out, you might want to ask me. Now, I want to kind of talk a little bit about, first of all, why I'm making you write poetry, because I imagine some of you are not all that excited about writing poetry, but here's my philosophy. Poetry is a compression of the best language that we have. At least that's what we aspire to. It was once said by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who's a pretty famous dead white poet, poetry can be defined as the best words in the best order. Now, there are lots of definitions for poetry. There are obviously lots of different kinds of poetry, some that we enjoy more than others, some that we appreciate more than others, anything from the lyrics in a pop music song to Shakespeare and everything in between, all right, can qualify as poetry. Hallmark greeting cards can qualify as poetry. We're kind of looking at poetry a little bit more with an eye towards what you might call publication. If you were going to submit to a literary journal, would your poem be good enough for them, right? So this is not intending to knock what you might write in your private journal at home, which is really more written for self than it is for an audience, or what you might write to, love poems, teenage love poems. We've all done that, I'm sure. Or other kinds of poetry that serve other kinds of purpose than appealing to the masses, in a more scholarly or professional way. That kind of perspective on what we're doing here allows me to focus on the how, the way in which we construct poems, regardless of the quality. Are you trying to apply the techniques, and are you trying to develop your skills? And that's really more what I'm able to grade than the finished product in a lot of senses, because it is all very, very subjective. So I try to focus on the things that we can objectify. Are you using metaphors effectively? Are you creating images? How does your rhyme work, when we get to that? So anyway, looking at the best words in the best order as an understanding for what we're trying to accomplish in writing poetry, that means we don't use poorly selected language. It means we don't use words we don't need. All right. It means we're very thoughtful about our language choices. And this is really a skill that we develop in revision, not just put it down and call it a poem, but put it down and work with it. And that's the work of writing. Okay. Does this word work better than that word? What happens if I reverse these two lines in the order of the poem? How does it affect my reader's feelings and understanding? And really, when we're talking about the best words in the best order, ultimately we have to look at what we're trying to accomplish, which is to affect your reader on some emotional level. All right, now not all poems are emotional in order to do that, but we'll see as we go along very quickly how we're able to tap into people's emotions more or less effectively given the way that we use our language and the way that we describe things. That's more a lesson for next time. Anyway, so if we have to use the best words in the best order, what that really does is it forces us to think about not just what we want to say, but how we want to say that. And that invariably will make you a better prose writer, a better fiction writer, ultimately, because when you practice being careful with your language, you have more power behind that language, and you have much more ability to connect with your reader in meaningful ways that automatically translates into better fiction writing or better memoir writing or whatever type of prose it is you prefer. So if we do the poetry first and we're focusing mostly on the words, it's a little bit easier in a way, because then we don't have to worry at the same time about things like plot and conflict and character development and all those other elements that are tied into prose writing, which are not necessarily a part of poetry writing because it's so condensed and can be such a snapshot. Anyway, so in order to show you a little bit of this, I thought I'd bring you through some of my favorite poems that have been written by others, and I'm going to read through them quickly, talk really briefly about what they do for me, and then I'm going to read you a couple of poems that I've written because I want to tell you a little bit about voice and the way that works. So if you open up the document called My Favorite Poems, you'll see a number of poems. I'm just going to read little excerpts from most of them except the first two. So the first one you see here is called Not Waving But Drowning by Stevie Smith, and it reads as follows. Nobody heard him, the dead man, but still he lay moaning. I was much further out than you thought, and not waving, but drowning. Poor chap, he always loved larking, and now he's dead. It must have been too cold for him, his heart gave way, they said. Oh, no, 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 it was too cold always. Still the dead one lay moaning. I was much too far out all my life, and not waving, but drowning. So I love this poem because I think it's short. It creates a simple image and a simple idea, but it employs irony, and it is incredibly dense in its meaning, which is ultimately really a measure of outstanding poetry, is that it gives you so much so quickly that it gives you something that you can chew on for a long time. Anyway, the next poem, Me Up at Does by E. E. Cummings, is a really interesting one for me because it raises questions about the order of words. It says, Me up at does out of the floor, quietly stare a poisoned mouse. Still, who alive is asking, what have I done that you wouldn't have? And why this is interesting to me is because it's essentially a little narrative about someone who poisoned a mouse and is now being stared at by that mouse, knowing it's going to die, and feeling terrible about what they've done, killing the mouse. And in this case, you notice that the words are all out of order in the first half of the poem. From the perspective of the speaker, they're all jumbled up, which kind of represents how we might react in a fear-based or confrontational situation, such as the mouse looking at you saying, hey, what the heck? Why'd you have to do that to me? Have you ever been confused in your words when you're under pressure in an encounter? That's kind of what's going on here. I'm going to skip a couple here and move on to a poem called The Mother by Gwendolyn Brooks. All right, not that I don't love Langston Hughes and Edgar Allan Poe, but just for time's sake. It says, this is a poem called The Mother by Gwendolyn Brooks again, and it's about a woman who has had abortions, or at least an abortion, multiple abortions, I think. And this is a moment where she's talking about how she felt. It says, I have heard in the voices of the wind, the voices of my dim-killed children, I have contracted. I have eased my dim dears at the breasts they could never suck. I have said, sweets, if I sinned, if I seized your luck, and your lives from your unfinished reach, if I stole your births and your names, your straight baby tears and your games, your stilted or lovely loves, your tumults, your marriages, aches, and your deaths, if I poisoned the beginnings of your breaths, believe that even in my deliberateness, I was not deliberate. And here we have a poem, again, that does so much in such a narrow part of the document. Beautiful, very understated rhyme here. Incredible word choice where you have certain words, such as contracted, which stilted, another word, which have here kind of multiple layers of meaning. They can mean one thing in one context and another in another context, and no matter how you read those words, for example, like contracted, you get an enhanced understanding of what's going on in the poem. So those are a few of the poems that I really love. I'd encourage you to read them all because they all provide really different voices and really different styles of poetry. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about different styles of poetry, just to give you a heads up that, you know, there's no certain specific way that you have to write a poem that's better than some other way to write a poem. So in order to do that, I want to talk a little bit about my own style. I've been writing poetry for as long as really I could write, you know, back in junior high, I think I started, but I started really getting serious about it more in my mid to late 20s. And it took a long time for me to know what my voice was. And what I mean by voice is not just how your poem sounds, but the things you choose to talk about and how you choose to talk about them. So your subject, but also your object. In other words, the idea of the poem as well as the thing that the poem is looking at or focusing on. Your vocabulary choices, your tone of voice, the form of the poem, whether you like strict forms or more loose forms, whether you like to write in particular forms like sonnet or others, or whether you like to write more free verse, how much and when and how you like to rhyme. The genre of your poem, you can write a narrative poem, you can write an epic poem, you can write what we call a snapshot poem, which really just focuses on a single image and refines it and hones in on it. So there are lots of different kinds of poems that can be effective. And part of the difficulty and part of the work, again, of being a poet is to find your own voice. So over years and years and years, I found that the things that I most enjoy writing about usually are the things that cause me the most pain. I also really love to write about the natural world, my natural environment, and use that as a metaphor for things like human nature, which I love to talk about, and the problems of our world, which I also love to talk about. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of my poetry is more dark and more negative. It doesn't have to be that way. But those are the things that are the most intriguing to me. You know, the dark side of humanity is really something that fascinates me. So I love to write about it. It's a way for me to not only express what I think about it, but also to help me understand what I think about it. So I'm going to read you a couple of my own poems. This is called The Chi of Early Spring, and it's really a poem that kind of evolved from, my own backyard. My wife was out in the backyard, and it's just tons of woods, and she was doing some sort of Tai Chi sort of thing, and that kind of triggered the idea. She was like standing on a rock in the stream that runs behind my house and balancing and doing weird stuff, and got me thinking about things. So here's this poem, and you can just listen to it and enjoy it or not. That's up to you. The Chi of Early Spring. Something about woods in the infancy of spring, when a silent vacancy cannot resist the sun, that softens crystalline mud and releases the underlings from hibernation, when buds are mere notions reaching for being, in their innocence preceding the rush of sapling blood that kindles the rage and gluttony of an unfurled summer. It is a warm stone, it is the sap rising, it is the nose of a crocus, the hint of wine on maple tips, the final oak leaf forced to fall, it is the green returning to moss, it is a smile on the wind. And the Chi of early spring. So nearing the sun displaces frost-born air to warm the stone and feed the moss as buds begin to fuzz and swell. The mallard and spouse briefly splash on their path to a northern summer, and the chickadees salute the unfurling of the ferns. But in the wake of this vitalization, when the snowbanks are distilled to leave the refuse of car window heaves, road sand caked on innocent shoulders, strewn with Smirnoff blue babies and Gallo glass and bags of McTrash and Newport wraps, Bud Light tin, and protected from sin, the truth of a winter spent. So there's a poem that kind of turns things around as it starts to observe the beauty of nature, and then you realize that once it's all uncovered, there's what people do to nature, throwing trash out of car windows. So that was one of my poems, and I'm just going to read you, I think, one other one. Let's see here. We are school buses, and this one's kind of, again, it's an observation of humanity in our existence, and one of the things I thought was important to us. We are school buses. Orange sunshine rising from behind us, blinding reflection off the side of a smoky bronze glass tower, capturing gold and the fall fuchsia maples in a fire mosaic dancing above the Connecticut River. Orange lighted tunnel turns us, the color of school buses and November hickory, and we are now all charged to transport hope through forests of winter skeletons, beyond the rising stars of Warhol glory. Orange rust on bare steel beams from the tears of 2 billion mothers stains our hands as we lift them up to build a railway bringing all children to a beneficent summer. And so there's another one of my poems. I mean, what I'm trying to show you here is that I kind of have this voice that incorporates nature. I love to focus on very specific images. I love to talk about the way people operate. And that's part of my voice, you know. Anyway, that about does it for our introductory lecture. If you have any questions, all right, hopefully I'll answer them in my first announcement. You can certainly ask in the Q&A on the discussions page about the course, and within the module, the Q&A for Module 1. Most of the course is just about ready, all right? The first module is essentially complete minus one video, which needs to come soon. All right. Have a great day. Welcome to the course, and email me or post a question if you have any as we get started. Thank you.